The year is 1951. The world is gripped by the freezing, merciless reality of the Korean War. Off the coast of the Korean peninsula, a Canadian destroyer, the HMCS Cayuga, is cutting through the dark, turbulent waters. The ship is alive with tension. From the distance, the low, heavy thud of artillery fire echoes across the deck. But deep inside the steel hull of the ship, in a small, cramped room converted into a makeshift operating room, a different kind of war is being fought. The air is thick, heavy with the suffocating smell of blood, sweat, and cheap antiseptics. The floor is lined with stretchers. 16 severely wounded South Korean soldiers have just been brought aboard. They are bleeding out. Some have shrapnel embedded deep in their chests. Others are holding shattered limbs. Time is running out, and absolute panic is clawing at the walls. Every eye in that room is fixed on one man, the ship's chief medical officer. Dr. Joseph Sear. He steps forward. He looks at the chaos, but his face remains completely unreadable. He picks up the scalpel. His hand is rock steady. His voice, when he speaks, is cold, calculated, and filled with an absolute, undeniable authority. He begins to bark orders to the nurses. For hours, under the flickering, dim light of a single surgical lamp, Dr. Sear cuts into flesh, sutures torn arteries, carefully extracts hot metal fragments, and battles the shadow of death. He does not stop. He does not hesitate. Through sheer willpower and precision, he accomplishes the impossible. He saves them all. Every single one of the 16 men survives. Within days, rumors of the miracle surgeon of the Cayuga spread like wildfire through the military ranks. He is hailed as a savior, a brilliant medical mind who performed complex surgeries under the worst possible conditions. He is about to become a national hero. But, at that exact moment, on that ship, no one knows the terrifying truth. The man holding the scalpel, the man they trusted with their lives, the man who just performed flawless surgeries, has never spent a single day inside a medical school. He has never attended a university. He does not hold a degree. In the eyes of the law, and the eyes of science, he is absolutely no one. His real name is Ferdinand Waldo Demara, and he is the greatest, most incomprehensible impostor in human history. How does this happen? How does a man with no formal education, no money, and no background in medicine, walk onto a military warship and convince elite naval officers that he is a master surgeon? To understand the mystery of Ferdinand Demara, we have to step away from the blood-stained operating room, and look into the dark, twisted psychology of human insecurity. Demara was not a traditional criminal. He didn't steal money, he stole lives. He didn't want wealth, he wanted identity. He was a man obsessed with a single, dangerous question. Can you become anyone you want, simply by making the world believe it? Long before he ever set foot on the HMCS Cayuga, Demara had already lived a dozen different lives. He had been a brilliant college professor of psychology, he had been a high-ranking structural engineer, he had been a devout, silent monk, and he had even served as the deputy warden of a maximum security prison. Every time he entered a new profession, he possessed zero knowledge. Yet, within weeks, he was running the department. He had decoded a fundamental flaw in human nature. A flaw that allowed him to slip past guards, credentials, and background checks with terrifying ease. His philosophy was simple, but lethal. He would later write, "In every organization, there is always a loose space, a vacuum of power that belongs to no one. Most people are afraid to step into it because they are insecure. But if you enter that space with absolute confidence, if you speak with enough authority, people will never ask for your papers. They are too busy doubting themselves, to ever doubt you." To understand how this monster of deception was created, we must look back to his origin. Ferdinand Demara was born in 1921. In Lawrence, Massachusetts. His family was wealthy, prominent, and respected. His father owned several theaters, and young Ferdinand grew up surrounded by luxury. But then, the Great Depression struck. In a matter of months, the family's fortune vanished into thin air. They went from a grand mansion, to a miserable, dark apartment in the poorest district of the city. For Ferdinand, the psychological shock was devastating. He felt naked, exposed, stripped of his value. He watched his father break down, and he realized a cruel truth about the world. Who you are doesn't matter. Only the image you present to society matters. At just 16 years old, unable to cope with his reality, Ferdinand ran away from home, searching for a new skin to live in. His first stop was a monastery. He joined the Cistercian monks, a silent, deeply disciplined order. For several years, he hid behind the heavy robes and the quiet stone walls. He learned how to manipulate his voice, how to project a sense of profound spiritual wisdom, and how to master absolute discipline. But the strict, quiet life couldn't contain his ambition. He didn't want to hide from the world forever, he wanted to conquer it. In 1941, with World War II erupting, Demara joined the United States Army. But he quickly realized that the army was too rigid. He was just a number, a private at the bottom of the food chain. He hated it. So, he decided it was time for his first real experiment. He stole the identity of a fellow soldier named Anthony Ngolia, deserted his post, and ran away. But soon, the authorities began to close in on him. Panic set in. To escape the army's reach, he did the only logical thing a master manipulator would do. He joined the United States Navy instead, under a completely different, fabricated name. While in the Navy, he applied to become an officer, but his lack of education blocked him. The system demanded credentials. Demara was furious. He knew he was smarter than the men commanding him. So, he decided to fake his own death. He left a suicide note on a lonely beach, changed his name to Dr. Robert Linton French, and walked back into civil society as a highly educated academic. As Dr. Robert Linton French, a completely fictional persona, Demara achieved the impossible. Armed with nothing but forged documents and a silver tongue, he secured a position as a college professor teaching psychology at a reputable university. Think about the sheer audacity of this act. A high school dropout, standing in front of a lecture hall full of young, ambitious students, explaining the complex machinery of the human mind. How did he do it? How did he teach a subject he had never studied? Demara's method was brutal and exhausting. Every single night, while the rest of the campus was asleep, he would lock himself in his dark office with a single lamp. He would open the advanced textbooks, and Jesamukno memorized the entire lesson plan for the next morning. He would memorize professional jargon, specific definitions, and historical case studies. When he walked into the classroom a few hours later, he didn't just read the material, he performed it. If a student asked a dangerous question that he didn't know the answer to, Demara would use a classic psychological trick. He would look at the student with a cold, piercing gaze, smile slightly, and say, "That is a fascinating question. Why don't you research that tonight and present it to the class tomorrow?" The students loved him. They thought he was a genius who was challenging their minds, when in reality, he was just hiding his own emptiness. But the thrill of the classroom wasn't enough. Soon, the FBI began investigating Dr. French for desertion. Demara had to flee again, abandoning his life as a professor in the middle of the night. His next destination would be even darker, and far more dangerous. He obtained forged credentials as a criminologist and walked straight into the state prison system. He was hired as the deputy warden of a maximum security prison. He was now in charge of hundreds of violent criminals, murderers, thieves, and hardened psychopaths. Men who could smell fear from a mile away. But Demara showed no fear. He used his manufactured authority to restructure the prison's security systems. He walked among the inmates without guards, looking them directly in the eyes. He became so successful that the state government began considering him for the position of top warden. But just as he reached the peak, an old acquaintance saw his face. The walls were closing in. Demara packed his bags, took his forged papers, and vanished into the fog once again. This brings us back to the cold waters of 1951. And the identity of Dr. Joseph Cyr. Demara had met the real Dr. Cyr, a naive and trusting young Canadian medical doctor, a year earlier. Cyr had mentioned how difficult it was to obtain a license to practice medicine across borders. Demara, pretending to be a helpful friend, offered to take Cyr's official documents and certificates to help him speed up the process. Instead, Demara took the documents, cut out Cyr's photographs, and replaced them with his own. He then crossed the border into Canada and volunteered for the Royal Canadian Navy, presenting himself as a brilliant, experienced physician ready to serve his country in the war. The Navy was desperate for doctors. They looked at the impressive paperwork, they listened to Demara's flawless, confident medical vocabulary, and they didn't double-check a single thing. Within weeks, he was commissioned as a lieutenant, issued a pristine white uniform, and sent straight to the front lines of the Korean War aboard the HMCS Cayuga. For months, his life on the ship was smooth. He treated minor colds, handed out aspirin, and stitched small cuts. He relied heavily on the ship's chief medical assistant, a highly trained nurse who did most of the routine work. Demara would simply nod, look professional, and sign the official reports. But then, came the fateful day of the battle. When those 16 critically wounded South Korean soldiers were carried onto the ship, the illusions vanished. This wasn't a game anymore. This wasn't a classroom where he could deflect questions. There were men bleeding to death on his floor. If he refused to operate, they would die, and his cover would be blown. If he did operate, one wrong cut of his scalpel would murder them. Demara stood in the center of the chaos, suffocating under the pressure. He turned to his assistant and said, "Prepare the patients. I must go to my cabin to prepare myself for a highly specialized procedure." He ran to his room, slammed the door, and locked it. His heart was hammering against his ribs. He pulled out a heavy, standard textbook on general surgery. His eyes flew across the pages, reading about chest wounds, amputations, internal bleeding. He was reading the instructions, minutes before he had to perform them on a living human being. He closed the book, took a deep breath, and let Ferdinand Demara die. He became the machine. He walked back into the operating room, and for the next several hours, he performed miracles. He successfully extracted a bullet lodged less than an inch from a soldier's heart. He amputated shattered limbs. He stopped massive internal hemorrhaging. When the sun rose over the ocean, all 16 soldiers were alive. He had beaten the odds. He had beaten science itself. The story of the miracle surgeon was so unbelievable that the Canadian government issued an official press release. They wanted the world to know about the heroic doctor serving on the Cayuga. The news traveled across the Atlantic, and landed on a breakfast table in a quiet house in Canada. The mother of the real Dr. Joseph Cyr was holding the morning newspaper. She looked at the headline, she looked at the picture of the heroic surgeon, and her blood ran cold. The face looking back at her was a complete stranger. She immediately contacted the authorities. When the telegraph reached the captain of the HMCS Cayuga, ordering the immediate arrest of Dr. Cyr, the crew refused to believe it. It was impossible. This man had saved their friends. He was the most competent officer on the ship. But when Demara was brought into the captain's quarters, he didn't fight. He didn't argue. He looked at the captain, smiled his familiar, melancholic smile, and simply nodded. The game was over. The aftermath of the discovery was a bizarre display of political panic. The Canadian Navy was utterly humiliated. They had sent a man with zero medical training to lead a surgical unit in a war zone. If the public found out, the scandal would destroy the government's reputation. So, instead of putting Ferdinand Demara on trial, instead of throwing him into a dark prison cell, the government chose to hide the truth. They quietly gave him an administrative discharge, put him on a civilian train, and ordered him to disappear. They protected the prevalent, to protect themselves. But Demara's greatest punishment was yet to come. In 1957, Life magazine discovered his story and published a massive, explosive article detailing all of his lives. He became an overnight sensation. Hollywood bought the rights to his life and produced a movie titled The Great Impostor. Suddenly, everyone knew his face. Every police officer, every university dean, every hospital administrator in North America knew the name Ferdinand Waldo Demara. The fame, which he had chased for so long, became his ultimate prison. He could no longer walk into a loose space. He could no longer slip into a vacuum of power. Every time he tried to build a new life, someone would look at him, point a finger, and whisper, "That's him. That's the imposter." He was stripped of his superpower. He was forced to spend the remaining years of his life inside his own skin, a skin he had spent a lifetime trying to escape. He eventually found a small job as a minister at a hospital, using his real name, but the magic was gone. He died in 1982. A broken, lonely man whose true identity had been entirely swallowed by the ghosts of the men he used to be. Today, the case file of Ferdinand Demara remains a profound mystery in the archives of human psychology. Was he a dangerous sociopath who played with the lives of innocent people for his own amusement? Was he a hero who, despite his lies, saved 16 souls from the jaws of death? Or was he simply a mirror reflecting the deepest flaw of modern civilization? A civilization that is so obsessed with titles, certificates, and pieces of paper, that it cannot see the real human being standing right in front of its eyes. Welcome to the archive. If you believe that history hides more dark secrets, and if you want to join us as we uncover the forgotten dossiers of the past, hit that subscribe button right now, leave a comment with your thoughts on Demara, and join the family. A new file is already being opened, and the next truth might be even more terrifying than the last. See you soon.